In the year 1872, the American frontier was a place where dust, danger, and destiny walked side by side. Small towns appeared in the middle of endless deserts, built from rough wood and stubborn hope. Cowboys rode for days without seeing another soul. Trains carried dreams across iron tracks, and every stranger had a story. But among the many legends whispered across saloons and campfires, there was one story that even the bravest men avoided talking about. It was the story of a girl who waited at a forgotten train platform. A platform that no longer existed. And a train that never came. Our story begins in a quiet frontier town called Red Hollow. Red Hollow was the kind of place that most maps forgot. A handful of wooden buildings stood along a dusty road. A saloon, a blacksmith, a small sheriff's office, and at the edge of town, an old railway station that had not seen a train in years. The railroad company had abandoned the station long ago after a terrible accident. Most people in town avoided that place after sunset. But not everyone believed in ghost stories. One evening, a lone rider approached the town. His name was Thomas Hale. Thomas was a gunslinger who had spent most of his life riding across the frontier. His hat was worn, his coat covered in dust, and the revolver at his side had seen more than its share of trouble. He had no family, no home, and no reason to stay anywhere for long. As he rode into town, the sun was sinking behind the hills, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and red. Thomas tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped inside. The saloon was quiet. A few men sat at wooden tables, the bartender cleaned dusty glasses, and an old piano in the corner played a slow, tired tune. Thomas ordered a drink and sat near the window. That's when he noticed something strange. The people in the saloon kept glancing toward the railway station outside town. Finally, Thomas leaned toward the bartender. "What's out there?" he asked. The bartender stopped cleaning the glass and looked at him carefully. "You new here?" the bartender asked. Thomas nodded. The bartender sighed. "Then you should know something," he said quietly. "No one goes near the station after dark." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "And why is that?" The bartender hesitated before answering. "Because of the girl." The men sitting nearby fell silent. One of them muttered under his breath, "She's still waiting." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Waiting for what?" The bartender lowered his voice. 20 years ago, there was a train scheduled to stop here. A young woman was supposed to meet someone arriving on that train. But the train never arrived. Thomas frowned. "What happened to it?" The bartender looked toward the door. It crashed in the mountains before reaching the town. No survivors. Thomas took a slow sip of his drink. "And the girl?" The bartender spoke softly. "She never believed the train was gone. They say she still waits at the platform every night." Some of the men in the saloon crossed themselves. Thomas chuckled. "You're telling me a ghost is standing out there waiting for a train?" No one laughed. The bartender looked him straight in the eyes. "You'll see." Later that night, Thomas stepped outside. The town was quiet now. Most windows were dark, and the wind pushed dust through the empty street. In the distance, the old railway station stood alone beneath the pale moonlight. Thomas had never been the kind of man who feared stories. So he started walking. The closer he got to the station, the colder the air seemed to become. The wooden platform creaked beneath his boots. The rails stretched into darkness. And then, he saw her. A young woman stood at the far end of the platform. She wore a pale dress that moved softly in the wind. Her long dark hair fell across her shoulders. She stood perfectly still, staring down the tracks. Thomas slowly approached. "Miss?" he called out. The woman turned her head. Her face was beautiful, but there was something strange about her expression, a sadness that seemed too deep for words. She looked at him quietly. Then she asked in a soft voice, "Have you seen my train?" Thomas paused. "What train are you waiting for?" "The evening train from the east," she replied. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. That train doesn't run anymore. The girl looked back toward the empty tracks. It must be late, she whispered. I've been waiting a long time. Thomas stepped closer. How long? The girl turned toward him again. Since 1852, Thomas felt his heart skip. That's 20 years ago. The girl tilted her head slightly. Has it really been that long? The wind grew stronger, carrying dust across the platform. Thomas suddenly remembered the bartender's story. The train crash, the lost passengers, the girl waiting. You were meeting someone, Thomas said quietly. The girl nodded. My husband. He was coming home from the war. Thomas swallowed. And the train? The girl looked down the tracks again. It never came. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas noticed something strange. The town behind them was gone. The lights had disappeared. The road was gone. There was only darkness. And the old railway platform. The girl stepped closer to him. Her voice was barely a whisper. Will you wait with me? Thomas looked down the empty tracks. He had spent his whole life riding from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to belong. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Loneliness. He looked back at the girl. Maybe, he said slowly. At that moment, a distant sound echoed across the desert. A train whistle. Thomas turned toward the tracks. But there was no train. Only darkness and fog. When the townspeople woke the next morning, they found Thomas's horse tied outside the saloon. But Thomas Hale was gone. No tracks. No signs of a struggle. Nothing. And some nights, when the wind is quiet and the moon hangs low above the desert, people say they can see two figures standing at the old railway platform. A girl in a pale dress, and a cowboy with a worn hat, still waiting for a train that never arrived.